The explosion echoed across Jake Morrison's 400-acre ranch at exactly 6:47 a.m., rattling the windows of his century-old farmhouse and sending his cattle into a panicked stampede toward the eastern pasture. Coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips, Jake bolted from his kitchen chair and grabbed the binoculars from the windowsill. What he saw through the early morning haze made his blood run cold. A construction crew was scattered across his back 40, some lying flat on the ground, others running in circles, all of them screaming. Their bright orange hard hats dotted the landscape like traffic cones, and in the center of the chaos, a massive excavator sat motionless, its operator's cabin door hanging open. Black smoke billowed from a crater that hadn't existed the day before. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, pulling on his boots and grabbing his rifle from the gun rack. He'd lived on this land for 15 years, inherited it from his grandfather who'd owned it for 60 years before that. Nobody, and he meant nobody, had permission to be digging on his property. As he jogged across the field, dodging panicked Holstein cows, the pieces started falling into place. Yesterday, he'd noticed surveyors' flags scattered around his property line, but he assumed they were marking boundaries for his neighbor's fence repair. The neighbor in question was Willowbrook Estates, a sprawling subdivision that had sprouted up 5 years ago like concrete mushrooms after a rain. The homeowners association there had been nothing but trouble since day one. Complaints about his roosters crowing, his cattle smell, and his unsightly farm equipment visible from their pristine sidewalks. But this was different. This was trespassing. This was destruction of private property, and somehow they'd managed to trigger one of the defensive measures Jake had installed after a series of break-ins 2 summers ago. The flashbang traps had been his brother-in-law's idea. Marcus, a former Army explosive ordnance disposal specialist, had helped Jake install a dozen of them along the more remote sections of his property after thieves had made off with 2 ATVs and $1,000 worth of tools. They weren't designed to seriously injure anyone, just scare the living daylights out of trespassers and alert Jake to unwanted visitors. The devices were perfectly legal on private property in Texas, triggered by pressure plates buried 6 inches underground and clearly marked with warning signs that any legitimate visitor would see. Apparently, the construction crew hadn't bothered to look. Jake reached the scene to find a man in an expensive suit screaming into his phone while gesturing wildly at the crater. The suit looked familiar. Harold Pemberton, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA and Jake's least favorite human being on the planet. Pemberton had spent the last 5 years trying every legal trick in the book to force Jake to sell his land, claiming it was an eyesore that damaged property values. "Morrison," Pemberton's face was red as a fire truck. "What the hell kind of operation are you running here? My contractors could have been killed." Jake shouldered his rifle and surveyed the damage. The excavator had been digging a trench in a straight line across his property, and based on the trajectory, they'd been heading toward the main road. A pipeline project by the looks of it. "Your contractors are trespassing on my land, Harold. The question is, what gives you the right to be here?" "We have easement rights through this section," Pemberton sputtered, pulling out a folded document. "The city granted us permission to install a water main to service the eastern expansion of Willowbrook Estates." Jake examined the papers, his jaw tightening with each line. The easement described a strip of land that definitely included part of his property, but something about the documentation looked off. The signatures seemed rushed, and the property description didn't match his deed exactly. "When exactly did you file this easement, Harold?" Jake asked, his voice dangerously quiet. 6 months ago. It's all perfectly legal." But Jake knew it wasn't. He never received any notice about easement proceedings, never been contacted by the city about using his land. Which meant either the city had made a massive administrative error or Harold Pemberton and his HOA cronies had found a way to forge an easement through his property. Either way, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. 3 hours later, Jake sat in the cramped office of the county clerk, scrolling through public records on a computer that belonged in a museum. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he cross-referenced property deeds, easement filings, and municipal permits. What he found made his stomach churn. The easement Harold Pemberton had waved around was real, officially filed and stamped by the city 6 months ago. But according to the notification requirements, Jake should have received certified mail about the proceedings 30 days before the filing date. He'd received nothing. More disturbing was the signature on the approval form. City Planning Director Sarah Chen, who according to the newspaper archives had been on medical leave during the entire month the easement was supposedly reviewed and approved. "Find what you're looking for?" asked Margaret Walsh, the elderly clerk who'd been manning the desk since the Carter administration. "Unfortunately, yes." Jake printed the documents and studied them under the harsh light. "Margaret, do you remember this easement filing? It's a big one. Cuts right through Morrison Ranch." Margaret adjusted her reading glasses and examined the papers. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "That's odd. Easements this size usually require a public hearing. I don't recall any notices being posted. She pulled out a thick logbook and flipped through pages. Here's the problem. Sarah Chen's signature is on this, but she was in the hospital for surgery that whole month. I sent her get-well flowers myself. Jake felt his anger crystallize into cold determination. So this is fraud. Looks that way, but proving it won't be easy. These documents are in the system now, and undoing them requires more than just catching the forgery. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his ranch foreman, Carlos. More crews showed up. Different company. It got lawyers with them. Racing back to his ranch, Jake arrived to find this situation had escalated dramatically. The morning's construction crew was gone, but they'd been replaced by a larger operation. 2 excavators, a bulldozer, and a crew of 20 men were setting up equipment along the same line where the explosion had occurred. Yellow caution tape surrounded the crater, and someone had posted new signs reading "Authorized Construction Zone, Keep Out." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the 3 people in expensive suits standing next to a black sedan, watching Jake approach with predatory smiles. "Mr. Morrison," called out a tall woman with silver hair stepping forward with a briefcase. "I'm attorney Janet Mills representing Willowbrook Estates HOA. We need to discuss your illegal booby traps." Jake kept his rifle lowered but visible. "They're not booby traps. They're legal security devices on my private property, clearly marked with warning signs. Nevertheless, you'll be hearing from the sheriff's department about reckless endangerment. 3 of our workers required medical attention this morning." Mills opened her briefcase and pulled out another set of documents. "In the meantime, we'll be proceeding with the authorized utility installation. Any interference will result in criminal charges." "Show me the environmental impact study for this pipeline," Jake demanded. Mills exchanged glances with her companions. "That's not required for water mains under 50,000 gallons per day." "Except this isn't a water main, is it?" Jake had done his homework during the drive back. Water mains don't require trenches 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide. This is for natural gas or oil, which means you need state permits, environmental reviews, and landowner consent, none of which you have. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Mills cleared her throat. "Mr. Morrison, you're interfering with legitimate municipal improvements. The easement is legal and binding." With a forged signature from a city official who was in the hospital, Jake pulled out his phone and showed them photos of the documents. Sarah Chen was having kidney surgery the day she supposedly approved your easement. "Want to explain that?" Mill's confident expression cracked slightly. "I'm sure it is a reasonable explanation." Boom. Another explosion echoed across the ranch as the lead excavator triggered a second flashbang trap. The operator jumped from his machine, cursing loudly in Spanish while his hard hat rolled across the ground. Jake couldn't help but grin. "You might want to tell your boys to be more careful where they step," he said. "I've got 10 more of those devices scattered around the property, and unlike you, they're all perfectly legal." The construction foreman was shouting into his radio, calling for the crew to halt operations. Mills looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but Jake noticed something else. One of the other lawyers was taking pictures of everything with a professional camera, documenting angles and distances with the precision of a crime scene investigator. "We'll be back with a court order," Mills announced, snapping her briefcase shut. "And next time, we'll have the sheriff's bomb squad clear your little surprises." As the convoy of vehicles departed, Carlos jogged over from the barn. "Boss, you might want to see this." He held up his phone showing a video he recorded. "That lawyer lady was making calls while you were talking. I got close enough to hear some of it." Jake played the video, turning up the volume. Mill's voice was faint but audible. "No, the Morrison situation is more complicated than we thought. He knows about Sarah Chen. Yes, I understand the timeline is crucial. The gas rights expire next month if we don't complete the connection. No, we can't wait for proper permits. Tell Pemberton to accelerate the pressure campaign." Gas rights. Jake's blood turned to ice. This wasn't about water mains or municipal improvements. Willowbrook Estates had somehow discovered natural gas deposits running beneath his ranch, and they were trying to steal access to it through fraudulent easements. The war was just beginning, and Jake Morrison intended to win it. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into Jake's driveway at dawn, followed by a bomb squad van and what looked like half the county's emergency response team. Sheriff Tom Bradley had been a friend of Jake's grandfather, but the grim expression on his weathered face suggested this wasn't a social call. "Jake, I'm sorry about this, but I've got a warrant," Bradley said, holding up the legal document. "Complaint of reckless endangerment and maintaining illegal explosive devices. Judge Harrison signed it an hour ago." Jake had been expecting this. "Tom, those devices are completely legal. They're commercial security flashbangs properly installed on my private property with clear warning signs. I've got the receipts and installation documentation." "I know, son, but I still have to respond to the complaint." Bradley gestured to the bomb squad team suiting up behind him. They're going to need to locate and disarm the remaining devices, for everyone's safety. As the bomb squad began their sweep, Jake noticed something that made his stomach drop. Judge Harrison was Harold Pemberton's golf partner and had been photographed at several Willowbrook Estates community events. The corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined. His phone rang, his lawyer, Maria Santos, calling with news that wasn't any better. "Jake, I've got the preliminary injunction hearing scheduled for tomorrow. There's a problem. The HOA filed a countersuit this morning claiming you've been sabotaging legitimate municipal infrastructure projects. They're asking for damages in the millions and want you arrested for domestic terrorism." Domestic terrorism? For protecting my own property? It gets worse. They've retained Blackstone Legal, the biggest corporate law firm in Houston. This isn't some neighborhood dispute anymore. Someone with serious money is backing this operation. Jake watched the bomb squad carefully excavate his security devices, each one representing hundreds of dollars and hours of work with his brother-in-law, Marcus. "Maria, I need you to file an emergency motion. I've got evidence that the gas rights under my property expire next month if they don't establish pipeline access. This whole thing is a resource grab. Gas rights? Jake, if there's natural gas under your land, we're talking about potentially millions of dollars in royalties. No wonder they're playing hardball." After the authorities left with his disarmed security devices, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He called Channel 7 News. Reporter Amanda Chen, no relation to the hospitalized city planner, arrived that afternoon with a camera crew and an appetite for investigative journalism. Jake had done his research. Chen had won awards for exposing municipal corruption and wouldn't be easily intimidated by corporate lawyers. "Mr. Morrison, these are serious allegations you're making," Chen said as her cameraman filmed the massive trench scaring Jake's property. "You're claiming that a homeowners association has forged city documents to steal access to natural gas deposits." "I'm not claiming it. I'm proving it." Jake handed her copies of all of his documentation. The forged easement, the hospital records proving Sarah Chen's absence, the recorded conversation about gas rights and geological surveys he'd obtained showing significant natural gas deposits beneath his ranch. "How long have you known about the gas deposits?" "I didn't until yesterday. My grandfather never mentioned them, probably because extraction technology wasn't viable back then. But with fracking and horizontal drilling, what used to be worthless rock formations are now worth millions." The interview was interrupted by the arrival of 3 black SUVs. Harold Pemberton emerged from the lead vehicle with attorney Janet Mills and 2 men Jake didn't recognize, expensive suits, earpieces, and the cold demeanor of corporate enforcers. "Mr. Morrison, you need to cease this defamatory media campaign immediately," Mills called out, approaching with a fresh set of legal documents. "These baseless accusations constitute libel and we're prepared to file for immediate damages." Amanda Chen stepped forward, camera still rolling. "Ma'am, I'm Amanda Chen with Channel 7 News. Would you care to comment on the allegations that your client forged city planning documents?" "No comment. This interview is over." Mills turned to Jake. "Mr. Morrison, you have 24 hours to retract your false statements and issue a public apology, or we'll file criminal charges for harassment and stalking." "Stalking? On my own property?" One of the unidentified men stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps we could discuss a reasonable settlement. Willowbrook Estates is prepared to offer fair market value for a pipeline easement through your property." Jake studied the man's face. Something about him screamed oil and gas industry, probably a corporate negotiator brought in to close the deal quickly. "And what do you consider fair market value?" $200,000 for a 50-foot easement. Jake almost laughed. If his property sat on top of significant gas deposits, a proper royalty agreement could be worth 10 times that amount annually. "Get off my land." "Mr. Morrison, you're making a serious mistake. There are larger forces at play here than you understand. Are you threatening me?" The man smiled without warmth. "I'm offering you an opportunity to resolve this matter amicably. Not everyone gets a second chance." That evening, as Amanda Chen's story aired on the evening news, Jake's phone started ringing with calls from other local property owners. Apparently, he wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. 6 other landowners in the county had received similar easement notices for pipeline access, all with the same forged signatures and backdated approvals. But the most interesting call came from Marcus, his brother-in-law. "Jake, I've been doing some research on your HOA friends. Harold Pemberton doesn't just run Willowbrook Estates, he sits on the board of directors for 3 different energy companies. One of them, Lone Star Gas Holdings, filed for drilling permits in your area last year but was denied due to landowner objections. So they decided to steal access instead of buying it legally. It's bigger than that. I pulled the corporate filings. Lone Star Gas Holdings is a subsidiary of Pemberton Industries. Harold Pemberton isn't just the HOA president. He's potentially the primary beneficiary of this entire operation. Jake felt the pieces clicking into place. The fraudulent easements, the rushed timeline, the high-powered legal team, the corporate negotiators. It was all part of a coordinated scheme to steal mineral rights from multiple property owners simultaneously. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or face the consequences. This is your final warning. Jake deleted the message and reached for his grandfather's old hunting rifle. If they wanted to escalate this fight, he was ready. But first, he had one more call to make to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Harold Pemberton and his conspirators had just graduated from civil fraud to federal racketeering charges. The FBI raid on Willowbrook Estates began at 5:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Jake's initial call to the white-collar crime division. Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez had moved fast once she saw the evidence: forged government documents, interstate wire fraud, and what appeared to be a multi-million-dollar conspiracy involving municipal officials, corporate executives, and fraudulent mineral rights claims. Jake watched from his kitchen window as a convoy of federal vehicles surrounded the HOA office building. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since Amanda Chen's follow-up investigative series had gone viral, drawing attention from national news outlets and triggering a state attorney general investigation. But Harold Pemberton wasn't going down without a fight. At 6:45 a.m., Jake's motion sensors detected movement along his property line. Through his binoculars, he could see a familiar sight: construction equipment rolling across his back 40, heading straight for the same pipeline route they tried to dig 3 weeks earlier. But this time, something was different. These weren't the usual orange-vested crews with legitimate-looking permits. These men wore black tactical gear and moved with military precision. Jake grabbed his rifle and his phone, speed-dialing Agent Rodriguez while jogging toward the intrusion. "Agent Rodriguez, they're back on my property. But these aren't construction workers. They look like private military contractors." "Jake, get out of there now." "We've got reports that Pemberton hired Apex Security Solutions. They're a mercenary outfit that handles problem resolution for energy companies. We're sending backup, but you need to stay clear." But Jake had spent 15 years on this land, and he knew every rock, tree, and hidden trail better than anyone. More importantly, he'd spent the last 3 weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. Working with Marcus and 3 other military veterans from the area, Jake had installed a new defensive system. Not the simple flashbangs that had been confiscated, but a sophisticated network of motion-activated cameras, remotely triggered smoke canisters, and strategically placed obstacles designed to funnel intruders into predetermined kill zones where law enforcement could safely apprehend them. The lead vehicle, the armored Humvee, hit the first obstacle at exactly 7:02 a.m. Jake had dug a camouflaged trench across the main access road, filling it with loose dirt that would support a person on foot but collapse under vehicular weight. The Humvee dropped nose first into the hole with a satisfying crunch of crumpled metal. "This is Jake Morrison on private property," he announced through a portable PA system Marcus had rigged up. "You're trespassing on posted land. Leave immediately or face the consequences." The response came in the form of automatic gunfire. Jake dove behind his grandfather's old stone fence as bullets chipped away at the century-old rocks. These weren't warning shots. They were shooting to kill. But they'd made a critical tactical error. Jake wasn't some weekend warrior playing soldier. He'd grown up hunting these fields, knew every sightline and defensive position, and had home field advantage against mercenaries who'd never seen the terrain before. The smoke canisters activated as the tactical team advanced, filling the field with thick gray clouds that obscured visibility but didn't affect Jake's pre-positioned cameras. On his tablet, he could track their movements in real time while remaining invisible to their thermal scopes. "Rodriguez, I count 8 hostiles with automatic weapons," Jake radioed. "They're advancing on my position with intent to kill. I'm defending myself under Texas Castle Doctrine." "Understood. Federal tactical team is 5 minutes out. Hold your position." Jake triggered the second defensive layer, remotely activated truck horns positioned throughout the property that created a cacophony of noise, disrupting their tactical communications and masking his own movements. While they struggled to coordinate through the audio chaos, Jake moved his primary firing position in the old windmill tower. From 30 feet up, with clear sight lines across his property, Jake could see the tactical team's positions despite the smoke. But instead of engaging with lethal force, he made a different choice. Using his grandfather's old deer rifle, Jake began systematically disabling their equipment, shooting out vehicle tires, destroying radio antennas, and putting rounds through their expensive tactical gear. "This is your final warning," he announced. "Federal agents are en route. Surrender now, and you might avoid federal charges for attempted murder." The team leader apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Through his scope, Jake watched them fall back toward their disabled vehicles, dragging their wounded pride and expensive but now useless equipment. But the real fireworks were just beginning. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through his radio. "Jake, we've got movement on the main road. Large convoy approaching your position from the east." Through his binoculars, Jake could see a parade of vehicles that looked like a corporate board meeting had collided with a military convoy. Expensive sedans mixed with armored trucks, followed by what appeared to be a mobile command center and several news vans. Harold Pemberton had arrived for the final confrontation, and he brought an audience. The convoy stopped just outside Jake's property line, and Pemberton emerged from a black limousine wearing a bulletproof vest and flanked by what looked like a small army of lawyers, corporate executives, and private security personnel. Behind them, Jake could see news crews setting up cameras and satellite uplinks. "Morrison," Pemberton's voice carried across the field through a military-grade bullhorn. "This ends now. You're going to sign the easement agreement, or we're going to take your land through eminent domain proceedings. The federal government has declared this a matter of national energy security." Jake keyed his radio to Agent Rodriguez. "Is that true? Can they claim eminent domain for a private gas pipeline?" "Not legally, no, and especially not for fraudulent permits. But Pemberton's desperate. He's facing federal racketeering charges, and his entire corporate empire is about to collapse. This is his last play." Jake climbed down from the windmill and walked across his property toward the standoff, his rifle slung across his shoulder and his grandfather's deed to the land folded in his shirt pocket. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scarred earth where Pemberton's crews had tried to steal his birthright. 50 yards from the property line, Jake stopped and raised his own bullhorn. "Harold, you've got two choices. You can leave my land now and face whatever federal charges are coming your way, or you can keep trespassing and add armed invasion to your list of felonies. Either way, this ranch stays in the Morrison family just like it has for the past 75 years. Pemberton's response was to signal his security team forward. That's when the FBI tactical team arrived. The federal agents moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Pemberton's convoy before his security team could react. Agent Rodriguez's voice boomed through a tactical loudspeaker. "This is the FBI. Everyone on the ground, hands visible. Harold Pemberton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and accessory to attempted murder." Jake watched from his property line as Harold Pemberton, the man who terrorized him and 6 other landowners for months, was handcuffed and stuffed into the back of a federal vehicle. The corporate executives who'd backed his schemes scattered like roaches when the lights came on, but the FBI had been thorough. 17 people were arrested that morning, including 3 city officials, 5 corporate board members, and the entire leadership structure of Apex Security Solutions. But the real victory came 3 hours later when Agent Rodriguez walked across Jake's property with a folder full of documents. "Jake, I wanted to personally deliver this news. We've recovered the original geological surveys that started this whole mess. Your property isn't just sitting on natural gas deposits. It's sitting on one of the largest untapped reserves in East Texas. Conservative estimates put the value at $40 million in extraction rights." Jake whistled low. $40 million? No wonder they were willing to commit federal crimes to steal it. It gets better. Under Texas mineral rights law, since you own the surface rights and there are no existing mineral leases, you own everything underneath too. You're not just keeping a ranch. You're now officially a multimillionaire. The media circus that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Amanda Chen's investigative reporting had turned a local property dispute into a national story about corporate corruption and the rights of small landowners. Jake found himself testifying before a congressional subcommittee on energy policy, speaking at property rights conferences, and fielding calls from documentary filmmakers. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, at Harold Pemberton's sentencing hearing. Judge Sarah Chen, the real one, fully recovered from her surgery, presided over the proceedings with the kind of righteous anger that comes from having your signature forged on fraudulent documents. Pemberton, looking haggard and defeated in an orange jumpsuit, stood before the bench as she read his sentence. "Mr. Pemberton, your crimes represent a fundamental assault on the rule of law and the rights of property owners. You orchestrated a conspiracy that involved forgery, fraud, bribery, and ultimately attempted murder. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised probation. Additionally, you will pay restitution totaling $8.7 million to the affected landowners." Jake sat in the gallery next to the 6 other property owners who'd been targeted by Pemberton's scheme. They formed a support group of sorts, helping each other navigate the legal complexities of mineral rights and sharing resources for dealing with the media attention. 3 of them had discovered valuable deposits on their land too, turning Pemberton's criminal conspiracy into an unexpected windfall for his intended victims. After the hearing, Jake drove back to his ranch, which now had a proper security system installed by a legitimate company, along with a new barn, updated equipment, and the first oil derrick on Morrison land in 3 generations. The 40-acre field where Pemberton's crews had tried to dig their illegal pipeline had been restored and was green with winter wheat. Carlos met him at the gate with a grin and an envelope. "Boss, this came by special delivery." Inside was a formal apology from the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, now under new management following the mass resignations that had followed Pemberton's arrest. They were requesting permission to install a legitimate water main across a corner of Jake's property and offering fair market compensation plus annual royalties. Jake chuckled and handed the letter back to Carlos. "Tell them we'll consider it, but they follow proper procedures, get all the right permits, and ask nicely. No more shortcuts." That evening, Jake sat on his grandfather's porch with a beer and his laptop, video chatting with Marcus, who was deployed overseas again. "So what's next, millionaire rancher?" Marcus asked. "Going to retire to some tropical island?" Jake looked out across his land, the same rolling hills and oak trees his grandfather had loved, now secured for future generations of Morrisons. "Nah, I think I'll stay right here. Maybe expand the herd, fix up the old barn, plant some more winter wheat. This land's been good to my family for 75 years. Figure I owe it the same loyalty." "And the flashbang traps?" Jake grinned. "Legal and properly documented security devices installed by a licensed professional with all appropriate permits and warning signs." "Good man. Nobody messes with Morrison Ranch." "Nobody," Jake agreed, raising his beer toward the sunset. 6 months later, the Morrison Ranch story became a Harvard Business School case study on corporate ethics and the importance of due diligence in mineral rights acquisition. The ranch itself became a minor tourist attraction, with Jake offering weekend tours that combined Texas history, property rights education, and surprisingly good barbecue. But the best part of the whole ordeal wasn't the money or the fame. It was the handwritten letter Jake received from his grandfather's old army buddy who'd seen the story on the news. "Your granddad would be proud," the letter read. "You always said the Morrison family doesn't back down from bullies, no matter how big they think they are. You proved him right." Jake framed the letter and hung it in his grandfather's study, right next to the original deed to Morrison Ranch and a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local rancher defeats corporate conspiracy, heaps family land." Some battles are worth fighting, no matter the odds, and some land is worth defending, no matter the cost. Harold Pemberton learned that lesson the hard way from behind federal prison bars. Jake Morrison learned it too, but from the front porch of the ranch that would never leave his family again. The end.